Hypervigilance would be, to me, that is a flight. Sympathetic energy is more flight. I suppose that could, no, that could be fight also. So I would just say that's sympathetic, flight, fight. I guess it kind of depends on the flavor of it. So if someone's hypervigilant, so when I think of hypervigilance, to me that's more of like fear and something's coming to get me. So to me, it has more of the underlying flight energy to it. But I suppose someone can be hypervigilant in a predatory kind of way. I don't think hypervigilance is the right word for that though. But I'll just say being like highly alert. Yeah, I would just say being highly alert is definitely more of a sympathetic flight fight thing. I would say more flight, but it's obviously there's energy to that. Your body is like on overdrive. Your mind is probably assuming things, not just you, but anybody. Your mind is assuming things and creating an image of what is like out there or whatever. So your mind is coming up with things, storyfall state, but your state is like the energy, the motor's going, right? So the motor's going. So to me, that's definitely sympathetic energy without much ventral vagal brake, safe and social stuff happening. If the safe and social state were on, the hypervigilance just wouldn't be happening unless it was like necessary. Some people just need to be hypervigilant due to their environment, and that's an adaptive thing. I know police officers that I've heard from, hypervigilance is a skill, a necessary skill for them to ensure their own safety. So that kind of makes sense, right? So I think what I'm referring to more or less is those of us who just live day to day that aren't in those environments, that are hypervigilant. Like that is definitely going to be more of the flight, fight, sympathetic energy without a whole lot of vagal brake active. And so the issue here is, one, how do we develop the strength of the vagal brake in the first place, so that the hypervigilance doesn't kick on at all or as much? Because I don't think it's exactly all or nothing. Usually, in therapy, the way it works is that there's a decrease in intensity or a decrease in frequency of things like hypervigilance or depression kind of feelings. But that only comes from building the vagal brake strength. So building the ventral vagal pathways, the strength of those, and spending more and more time in the safe and social state and finding things that bring us there. So as we build those pathways, the defensive energy, including hypervigilance, should decrease in intensity and should decrease as far as how frequent that we're having those feelings. To me, that's all. When I think of hypervigilance, it's almost like a panic attack. It's not a full panic attack yet, but it's kind of like right on the verge of it. That's, in my mind, it's very close to like if anxiety was on one end of a spectrum and panic attack was on the other, like hypervigilance is in between those, more toward the panic attack side of things. That's how I conceptualize it. So yeah, the hypervigilance, yeah, very much a sympathetic thing. Yeah, exactly. So all it would take is one little thing to go into panic. It's like we're right on. If we're in a hypervigilance, we're right on the edge of, I think, a panic attack. But I don't know the word for it. But there's probably an equivalent for hypervigilance in the fight energy, the fight sympathetic, because I think it's more flight. And I'm thinking of like serial killers. Like those serial killers that like hunt their victim, and sorry if this is disturbing, by the way, I'm just thinking out loud, hope you don't mind. But like they must exist in some sort of state where they're like just on the verge, but it's not this like anxiousness. I don't think it's more of a predatory fight energy. It would have to be, right? So I don't know the word for that, but to me there seems to be a interesting discussion there, I guess. But I don't know enough about serial killers. So the question is, how do we be anchored when we're always feeling hypervigilant. So let's change the question a little bit to, how do we anchor ourselves in safety if we're always in a defensive state? How do we anchor ourselves in safety if we're always in a defensive state? So the first thing is, like, we got to realize it's possible. That's the first thing. Second thing would be to learn, I think, a new paradigm, and I think you personally, but if somebody's watching this, they've probably heard of polyvagal theory by now. So it's possible to change. We can learn a new paradigm. Polyvagal theory is the one that I recommend to be the most helpful. Third step could be to apply that to the self and build a new narrative for how we got to the way we are. Like, that could be helpful. So all those 3 steps, what that does is reduce the amount of judgment we have toward ourselves. And if we can reduce the amount of judgment, I think that might bring more possibility of change. I think that helps. And so if we can build a new narrative, we have a new paradigm, and we know that things are different, can be different, then hopefully we can become more curious about what that looks like for us, because change is possible. And we got to this defensive state for a reason, then we should be able to get out of this defensive state. And in the paradigm of the polyvagal theory and how I view the world, it's about being stuck, not broken. And I think people know that by now. If we have a new narrative about ourselves, then the previous stories about being defective or how things were my fault, or I shouldn't have done this, or I shouldn't have done that, all those things in my mind, don't really make sense anymore. If we have a new paradigm of the polyvagal theory, we apply it to ourselves, that paradigm applied to the self brings a new narrative. So now I have a new story of why I am the way that I am. And the old story I had, which is like, I'm just born defective, or I'm unlovable, or whatever it is. Now it's like, no, now I know my polyvagal ladder. I know I didn't get what I needed growing up, or the thing that I went through put me in a defensive state. So it's not like I'm born defective or I'm born unlovable or whatever it is. It's I'm just stuck in a defensive state because my needs weren't met, or when they should have been, or I got put into a stuck defensive state in a situation I didn't ask to be in, or I didn't deserve, or whatever. So that's a new story. So that's a new narrative. And to me, it has a lot less judgment in it. It just is. Like, it's just, this is my biology. Here's my life circumstances, and here I am now. That's a lot different than, being born defective, or being mentally ill, or, whatever else people fill in the blank there. Having those pieces, to me, opens up the potential for a little bit more hope, and opens up some avenues for change, in my opinion. And now it's like, okay, so the next step is what brings me to safety? What brings me in particular to safety? It might be like, what brings people to safety? That actually might be the next question, is what brings people in general to safety? And that's where people do all this internet research, and they go on Instagram and follow people, in the yoga space or meditation space or whatever. And they get ideas on how to self-regulate and how to, get some relief. But those are very general. And so the next step would be to take those general things and then whittle them down until we know that this doesn't work for me. This kind of does work for me. And then as we try different things, or as we just become curious about our day-to-day interactions, we can start to identify what works for us as individuals. And that's where change for me, I think, it really happens, is not just for me, but for all of us, like, what helps us as individuals. Because there's some stuff that just is not going to be helpful for everybody, I don't think. So that's how you build your capacity to anchor. The issue is not, how do I anchor when I'm hypervigilant? The issue is, how can I build my anchors to reduce my hypervigilance the next time? Like, once you're in the moment of a panic attack, I don't know, like, whatever coping skills help people out to, do that. But I'm more interested in like let's reduce the chances of that happening again or happening as intensely the next time. So when we're out of the panic attack, when we're in a baseline more or less, that's when that's when we need to put some work in and practice these things. We don't have don't wait for a problem. You know what I mean? Like we need to practice these things before the problem. And maybe we exist in a constant state of hypervigilance or anger, and that might be true, but there might be moments where it's less true, and you have more opportunities to do some practicing of these things. Yeah, reduce the chances of a panic attack by practicing anchoring when not in the difficulty. Makes sense. Yep, that's it. Yeah, we don't want to wait for the problem. We want to, like if you were going to play, I got water on myself. If you're going to play like baseball, and you wouldn't wait until you got up to the batter's plate to practice hitting a ball, right? You would hopefully practice that ahead of time. And the more you practice that, the more you build your skills in hitting a baseball, then when it's time to do it, you'll be ready to do it. But it also won't be as scary. Like when you go up to bat for the first time, it won't be as scary. You've done this a number of times. You'll be calmer. I would assume you'd be calmer and more confident. And you've already practiced your muscle memory is already intact. Like you know how to handle a situation, so it won't be as intense. Similar with anchoring. You want to practice this before the fact, and in those times where you're presented with something that might be more triggering, then it will not be as triggering because those pathways will be more exercised.